Welcome to Riverstone Reviews. Today we are going to reflect on the episodes 6 to 9 of The Expanse Season 5. As I've said in past videos, I'm a big fan of this show, and I watch it for my own escapism from the weekly routine. But I will step in and make a video when I see the show going astray. I made an earlier video about the problems with Clarissa and Amos's friendship, which was feeling forced upon an audience and the show rather than a natural attraction between the characters, and unfortunately that problem still exists. But there are also other issues arising that are causing me to question if The Expanse is starting to lose its way, moving away from the story and world that engaged its audience in the first place. So let's jump into the issues, and the first being with the character at the core of the world, James Holden. James Holden currently has no purpose. In the first 4 seasons, his character represented all factions, in that he was trying to do what was best to save humanity, which is why his crew consisted of Martians, Earthlings, and Belters all working together. But for some reason, the last 5 episodes, he's been delegated to standing in his ship staring at a screen. That's it. No more comments about whether his family is dead or not, nor any apparent concern. A genocide strike has been performed by Marcus against Earth, but he has no discussions or concerns about Earth or how it might respond. What is the situation with Belters? Or if Mars is using this action as an excuse to finally attack both Earth and Mars, which is why maybe they gave Marcus the ships and made the Free Navy possible. All he seems to care about is Naomi. It just doesn't feel authentic that she is now the center of his universe and focus above all else. She left to see her son and ex-Marcus and told Holden to stay behind. She did this herself. And James knows Naomi well enough that the vague SOS message to him repeated isn't her style. If she was in true danger and in need of rescue, the SOS would have been to anyone in that region of space for help. If it was to James only, it would have contained details why she needed his help and no one else's. But for an SOS to request the help from James Holden as if she has lost control of her ship means she doesn't want anyone else to help her, even if it means her own death. That doesn't make sense. Next is the handling of Alex and Bobby, who have now been relegated to sitting in the seats aboard the Razorback spouting exposition. They both represented the 2 sides of Mars. But because the show isn't dealing with Mars despite a planetary war brewing, their characters have become inactive. And after Alex ejected the Razorback's core to avoid being blown apart by missiles, I'm not sure how they're getting around. I can't imagine a ship as small as the Razorback, used only for racing, has a spare power core just sitting around in some small cargo space. Another problem is the forgotten protomolecule. Sure, it gets mentioned now and then as being in the possession of Marcus, but not a single insight into what more it is or why it matters. One season, handling it wrong could mean the end of all human life. And then this season, it is nothing but a tool for leverage by Marcus. Now I know it could come back later this season, but it takes time to unravel the mysteries of the molecule, and there isn't enough time left in this season for that. So unless they're going to have a long exposition in an episode about the protomolecule, then suddenly insert it into an episode, the whole specter of the protomolecule being a weapon for alien life wanting to take over our life is suddenly a non-factor. I also want to address the poor representation of the destruction caused on Earth. I don't know if the show has budget cuts this season, but this season has been all talk and no show. Talk about the protomolecule, but no sight of it. Talk about the Free Navy, but never any visual representation of the expansiveness of it. And all talk about the Earth's destruction. When Amos planned to get back to Baltimore to get to his brother, I thought we'd finally get to see a glimpse of the show's idea of interstellar destruction. But no, all we saw was his brother's headquarters with new beachfront property showing water where the city once was. I lived in New York City when the World Trade Towers came down, and went to downtown a number of times over the first 4 weeks to Ground Zero. What struck me is a week later, the building still looked like the city was abandoned for 100 years. Skyscraper windows, from the ground to as high as you could see, covered with layers of dust and particles, as if in a desert. The ground was filthy. Even the subway tunnels around the Trade Center had a layer of thick dust, thick enough to cover floor spots. Pulverized buildings, like what would have happened if an asteroid hit a city, creates a lot of dust, dirt, and particles. Amos's brother's headquarters should have looked like it survived the war. Instead, it was as clean as ever, but now water was coming up to its edges. The show put no effort into representing the total destruction the show went to great lengths to make a big deal of. As far as the world, this show has forgotten much of the setup from the previous seasons. At last view, the Leviathan or Belters were in control of the inner ring, With this attack on Earth, the Belters must be in control of the ring, so what does that mean? What is going on with the Leviathan? Is it part of the Free Navy? Are they outfitting it for war with weapons? What about Mars? Mars was a military might, so what are the Martians doing? They seemed lost without war, dismantling their military. But with this attack on Earth, you would think the Martians would start building up their military again to not be vulnerable to Belters if they decided to attack. And since Martian and Belters don't get along, this would make sense. What about the rest of the Belters? Previous shows, we had an idea of what different Belter colonies were doing or felt. Now we don't even see that, even though they're being dragged into a war by Marcus. Are they all behind Marcus or against him? I mean, we hear this in words, but we don't actually see it. This aspect of the show is where Thomas Jane's character, Detective Miller, is sorely missed. In the past, Miller was our connection to those who lived on the ground, the common Belter and their everyday plight. While the rest of the characters dealt with lofty issues in space, he was the one who reminded us that at the same time working people were struggling to get oxygen and water freely. Without him, the show has lost that connection. Now, Christian Evasarala, the former female president now on Earth's presidential cabinet, is on the ground in Luna, but she is in an elite society among government with an agenda. So when she says what the general people think, it's unsure whether it's the absolute truth or her trying to promote a position for political ends. Regardless, not having Miller has disconnected the show's tether to the grounded commoner and all about those who battle in space. Finally, the problems with Peaches have become more apparent. That is Clarissa Mao. The show or story has tried to turn her into a sympathetic character who is a good person and wants to help people. Yet she is the most ruthless and undiscriminating killer on the show. I thought it was weird in episode 6 when Amos was trying to talk to the crazy survivalist in the woods and trade for goods, that she killed the guy because he was going to shoot Amos, then talks how they shouldn't have done it. She could have knocked the guy out or disarmed him, but no, she kills him and then preaches. In episode 9, Amos, his brother, and Clarissa are faced with a rogue security group who are trying to shake them down for food. Amos's brother was going to kill these dangerous men right there, about 4 or 5 rogue security guards, but Clarissa steps in saying how they need to help people and be more human and let them go. Then later that night, because they didn't kill those guys, the rogue security guys got reinforcement and attack Amos and those at the island house. Amos's brother lost at least a half dozen of his own people in the attack, and Clarissa Mao killed at least a half dozen by her own hands. How was it more humane that twice as many people died than would have if they killed them earlier, and she did half the killing? No one calls out Clarissa for her BS. They just sympathize with her heart, then say nothing after she completely contradicts herself and murders more personally than anyone on the show minus Marcus. The show is trying to make her a good character, but her actions are heinous, and there is never a moment of self-reflection on her part, or criticism from other characters, which would add depth to a moment and to her character if she had to face her hypocrisy. As a result, I've started to dislike Peaches because it feels like the show is trying to force me to like her character or see her good side, while the show is also trying to present her character as strong because she's so deadly. In the end, all I see is a repulsing mix of self-righteousness and cold callousness. Her relationship with Amos is also causing me to not embrace Amos as much as I did in the first 4 seasons, because he calls this woman Peaches as almost a term of endearment. What I loved about Amos was he was this combination of brute force, black and white ideology, and yet had a need to connect with the most vulnerable people and attach to them. They are trying to portray Clarissa as the same. The difference is, Amos doesn't always kill. The people he's trying to protect don't always end up dead because of his decisions, and he tries to avoid killing in confrontations as much as possible by handling situations in a realistic way and appealing to the reality of a situation, not just pleading to the ideals of people. We are also constantly aware that Amos performs heroic actions on planets and in space where he helped people without anyone dying, and fought alongside others as his equal. Those of you out there who are going to draw parallels between Amos and Clarissa and see what they have done as the same. So I'm going to clearly explain how the show's development of these characters had made them completely different despite the script giving them the same sympathetic approach to life ending in brutal solutions. Clarissa was introduced as a revenge-filled assassin who murdered anyone who got in her way, even killed someone who just recognized her as Clarissa. For all these murders, she only spent a year in prison before being set free because of Earth's catastrophe. A character like this has to go a long way in good deeds to not only compensate for all the wrong we've witnessed her do, but to convince audience she's not just being good as a means to an end. So far, every one of her goodness of human speeches has resulted in more people she has had to kill by hand, which is a long way from being a likable person. On the other side, Amos was introduced as a crew person. He loved and protected Naomi as his sister, listened to orders, and only committed extreme violence to protect the lives of Naomi and the crew. He also deferred to Naomi's better judgment. This behavior extended to James Holden when James won over Amos's respect. Even when we found out about his past as Timmy and killing a gangster Amos, then taking his name, it was to protect his own brother. Amos's actions aren't self-righteous preachings. His actions come from his desire to protect those he loves. He isn't out on his own making decisions of life or death. He is operating within a family or crew unit. And many of his confrontations have ended in just fights or threats. But with Clarissa, it goes straight to brutal death. It's like Amos's whole trip to Earth really didn't add much to the story. We didn't see any great images of the destruction other than when they came out of prison. This whole journey has felt like a long way to get Clarissa Mal back into the story, when in fact her character has no real connection to the protomolecule nor the galactic conflict going on. And all at the expense of sidelining James Holden, Alex, and Bobby, making their characters inactive when their characters are at the core of the galactic conflict going on. So those are my reflections of episodes 4 to 9 on season 5 of The Expanse. I hope the show gets back on track, once again becoming more about the universe and those surviving within it instead of just being about side characters. But my fear is that we are seeing the pitfalls of when a show stays loyal to a book. Shows are often criticized when they diverge from the source material as reasons for the series or movies getting worse. But what happens when a show stays loyal to the source material and yet still starts to lose steam? For better or worse, shows need to be allowed to diverge to best tell stories within the medium they are being presented. And I hope The Expanse soon does the same. What was once a show about James Holden and Detective Miller exploring and trying to save the solar system is now about Naomi's past family and the misadventures of Amos and Peaches, with everything the show was built on now taking a back seat. I think the show should seriously consider diverging from the book if it is going to keep the world of The Expanse fully fleshed out. A novel tells a story. A television show tells a micro story each episode, a macro story over the season, and a global story that encompasses the entire run of the show. A book can focus on some characters and sideline others because the story is the most important part of a book. A television show, the characters are as important as the story. For if an audience detaches from the characters, they'll stop watching the show even if there's plenty of story left. A television show is also about world building. Stargate, Star Trek, Star Wars are primarily about the worlds they build, and fans think and ponder those worlds more than they do the individual episodes or seasons. If a show keeps the world of Mars, Earth, the Belters, and the protomolecule alive and vital, people will keep watching The Expanse even if stories wane, because the audience is engaging for the world. The stories are just ways to explore the world. This past season, the show has focused on stories about side characters that we don't care about as much as the main characters. Does anyone really care about the plight of Marcus, Philip, and Naomi as a family, or the friendship of Amos and Peaches more than James Holden's plight to save humanity, the alien artifacts on the other side of the ring, or about the battle building between Earth, Mars, and the Belt? That's all I've got for today. Please click, like, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. And as always, in the river of life, don't let yourself get pushed around by the currents. Be yourself. Be a stone in the river.